Hello dear viewers of the channel. Today we bring you a new episode on the topic. Finns, Poles, Belarusians, Ukrainians. Who is genetically the closest to Russians? If you scratch a Russian, you'll find a Tatar. Familiar phrase, right? It is often attributed with a knowing look to either Napoleon Bonaparte, the French Marquis de Custine, Alexander Pushkin, or Nikolai Karamzin. This saying has become so ingrained in our cultural and historical code that many generations have taken it as an absolute, unquestionable truth. The logic appears ironclad. More than 200 years of dependence on the Golden Horde, constant raids, mixed marriages, endless mingling of peoples in the cauldron of the Great Steppe. How could there not be mixing? Now imagine the faces of modern geneticists who, armed with the latest DNA sequencing technologies, took tens of thousands of blood and saliva samples from Smolensk to Vladivostok, loaded all this into supercomputers, and didn't find any Tatars there. At all. No significant Mongol or Turkic trace. There is simply no trace in the gene pool of ethnic Russians from central and northern Russia. The proportion of Asian genes in the average Russian person from Ryazan or Vologda hovers within the margin of statistical error, around 1–2%, which is no more than that of the average German or Austrian. And here arises a colossal question, one of enormous scale, which instantly turns our perception of our own history upside down. If we are not a mix of Slavs and the nomads of the Great Steppe, then who are we really? From what genetic dough is the Russian people made? Today, genetics has transformed from a dry laboratory science into the most precise and impartial time machine, where ancient chroniclers twisted the truth to please their princes, and historians rewrote textbooks for political reasons. DNA tells the truth, and does so with mathematical ruthlessness. The topic of genetic kinship is more relevant today than ever in an era when information wars are raging around us, and politicians are trying to build insurmountable walls, and entire nations quarrel over interpretations of events that happened thousands of years ago. But it is genetics that can cool hot heads with a cold shower of irrefutable facts. We are beginning to understand that blood and culture are completely different things, and our historical ideas about friends and enemies may not leave nothing of the real biological picture of the world. In this video, we will take a deep, detailed, and at times shocking dive into the genetic history of Eastern Europe. We will examine 3 or 4 fundamental and unexpected facts that will make you look at the map of the world in a new way and make you think. First, we will find out why Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians, in the eyes of impartial molecular biology, appear as one giant, indivisible genetic monolith, despite all the political storms. Second, we will reveal the incredible paradox of our relationship with the Poles, a people with whom we have shared territory for centuries, fought, quarrelled, reconciled, and who harbour a huge genetic surprise. Third, we will travel to the harsh Russian north to find out why a true native Pomor, or a resident of Arkhangelsk, is biologically much closer to a fiery Finn from Helsinki than to his compatriot from Kursk or Belgorod. We will explain how haplogroups work, why autosomal DNA is more important than chromosomes along the male line, and how entire civilizations peacefully assimilated. And to give you something to think about throughout our entire story, I'll throw out a teaser right now. At the end of this video, I'll name a European people who don't consider themselves Slavic and speak a distinct, ancient, and complex language. They live by a cold sea, but genetically they are so frighteningly close to the people of Central Russia that genetic scientists at first couldn't believe their eyes and had to double-check the test results. Are you intrigued? Then fasten your seatbelts. We're going on a journey along the spiral of DNA. Let's start with a completely unexpected and even amusing fact. The history of anthropology and the study of the origins of peoples is full of grand failures. Just 100 years ago, respectable professors in Pince-Nez seriously walked around with compasses and calipers, measuring the width of cheekbones, the shape of skulls, and the slant of eyes, trying to determine by these external features who was related to whom and who was an enemy. It wasn't just unreliable, it was laughable. A person's appearance, their phenotype, can change beyond recognition in just a few dozen generations under the influence of climate, diet, or random mutations. But the real breakthrough only happened at the turn of the 20th and 21st centuries, when population geneticists came onto the scene with their methods of analysing the Y chromosome, which is passed strictly from father to son, and mitochondrial DNA from mother to daughter, and later the analysis of autosomal DNA, which shows the entire set of a person's genes from all their ancestors. Large-scale studies by the Institute of General Genetics of the Russian Academy of Sciences and Professor Ayerbert's lab, led by Oleg Balanovsky, finally disproved the myth of a Tatar-Mongol trace. How did it happen that after 240 years of dependence on the horde, there are no Asian markers left in the blood of Russians? The explanation here is very simple, although it breaks stereotypes. The fact is that the Golden Horde never maintained occupation garrisons in Rus on a permanent basis. Batu and his descendants did not try to colonize the Russian forests. It was simply unprofitable and inconvenient for them from the perspective of their nomadic economy. They acted more like a brutal but pragmatic racketeering group. They would come, collect tribute, punish disobedience harshly, and then return to their steppes, where the grass was greener and the pastures for their horses were wider. Mixed marriages were extremely rare and mostly involved the upper nobility, when Russian princes married Khan's daughters for political alliances. But this drop in the ocean simply dissolved in the vast sea of millions of Slavic peasants without leaving any genetic trace. There's an interesting historical anecdote on this topic. When modern Tatars, the Volga and Kazan Tatars, when they began to take genetic tests en masse, it turned out that they themselves have very little in common with Genghis Khan's Mongols. The Volga Tatars turned out to be direct descendants of the ancient Volga Bulgars and local Finno-Ugric tribes, having simply adopted the Turkic language and Islam. So when we talk about the conflicts between ancient Rus and the Horde, from a biological point of view, these were often disputes between people who were genetically much closer to Europeans than to those from East Asia. Funny, isn't it? For centuries, we built our identity on opposing the East, but then geneticists came and said, guys, relax, you're all typical, boring Europeans. But if we're not Asians, then how close are we to our most obvious neighbours? Let's move on to those with whom we share a common East Slavic root. You've probably heard endless political debates about who is the true heir of Kievan Rus, who is the real Slav, who is a mix with Finno-Ugric peoples, or who is a Polonized borderlander. Politicians love to dig into the past to justify their ambitions in the present, but geneticists have an unexpected and very concrete fact on this matter, backed by hard numbers. If we take autosomal DNA, which is the most complete picture of our genome, of an average resident of Kursk, Oryol, or Belgorod regions of Russia, and compare it with the DNA of a resident of Poltava, Chernihiv, or Minsk, we won't see any difference at all. The genetic distance between these samples is so small that they can't be biologically separated into different peoples. This is a single, gigantic, genetically homogeneous cluster of Eastern Slavs. How did this happen? This causal relationship dates back to the era of the Great Migration of Peoples. The ancient Slavs, who, according to the most widely accepted theories of scholars, originated from the region between the Vistula, the Carpathians, and the Dnieper, began their expansion in powerful waves. They settled vast areas of the East European plain, moving along riverbeds. The chronicler Nestor, in his famous tale of bygone years, meticulously listed the tribes. Polyan, Drevliane, Rodomici, Krivici, Vietici. But the reality is that all of them carried almost identical gene pools, tied to the so-called macro group R1a, a haplogroup that is often, and rather simplistically, called Slavic, although it is much older than the Slavs themselves and originated thousands of years ago. An interesting historical paradox is that Belarusians, Ukrainians, and Central and Southern Russians are not just similar, they form one of the most monolithic and largest genetic pools in all of Eurasia. In Europe, where the population has been mixing for centuries, where Romans mixed and were replaced by Germanic peoples, and Celts mixed with Normans, such genetic homogeneity over such a vast territory is a phenomenon. Belarusians, by the way, demonstrate an amazing preservation of their ancient gene pool. They have practically avoided genetic influx from outside thanks to living surrounded by the impassable swamps and forests of Police. Ukrainians have preserved a strong Slavic core with a slighted mixture of steppe, Sarmatian, and Alan, that is, Indo-European, not Turkic, components in the south. Russians from central regions extended this gene pool across vast eastern territories. The irony of the situation is that while modern propagandists on different sides are rapidly trying to prove their uniqueness and blood purity, a genetic test simply laughs at them. You can shout about your political exceptionalism as much as you want, but your chromosomes stubbornly show that you and your ideological opponent on the other side of the border are made from the same biological material. But if everything is intuitively clear with Belarusians and Ukrainians, after all, the languages are very similar, the religion is the same, and the history is shared, what will genetics say about a people who, for many centuries, were Russia's main geopolitical rivals? Let's look west toward Warsaw. Here we come to the most intriguing historical contradiction. Let's start with an unexpected fact that simply confuses many people. Poles are genetically closer to Russians than the vast majority of other European peoples. And in terms of the concentration of the Slavic haplogroup R1A, they even surpass Russians. If among ethnic Russians the share of R1EAI averages from 46 to 50% depending on the region, among Poles it reaches an incredible 57 to 60%. So, from the perspective of pure molecular biology, Poles are quintessential carriers of a highly concentrated ancient Proto-Slavic gene pool, and Russians are in that same incredibly tight genetic boat alongside them. But wait, how can that be? All our history screams the opposite. The causal gap between genetics and history here reaches epic proportions. Starting from the early Middle Ages, when Poland adopted Catholicism from Rome and Rus adopted Orthodoxy from Byzantium, these two branches of the same tree began to move in opposite civilizational directions. This led to centuries of endless, bloody and brutal conflict. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and the Tsardom of Moscow clashed in a deadly struggle for dominance in Eastern Europe. We remember the time of troubles, when Polish garrisons occupied the Moscow Kremlin, and false Dmitry tried to reshape Russes in a Western manner. We remember the endless Livonian Wars. By the way, since we're talking about the information wars of that time and the Livonian War, do you remember the famous myth that Ivan the Terrible, in a fit of rage, killed his beloved son Ivan? Well, this is a classic, brilliantly executed smear campaign launched by Westerners and papal legates, such as Antonio Posavino. Their goal was to discredit an inconvenient, strong geopolitical competitor in the eyes of European courts. There is no real, verifiable evidence that he killed his son, and modern studies of the tombs do not confirm it either. But the myth stuck firmly. Even Ilya Repin painted a picture about it. And just as political myths about crazy Russian tsars took root, so did the myths about our fundamental, deep incompatibility with Europe, as represented by Poland. A historical anecdote. When Russian troops engaged in hand-to-hand combat with the Polish winged hussars near Smolensk or Moscow, they fought each other with sabres and burned cities. From a biological point of view, this was an absolute 100% family feud. It was a colossal civil war within a single genetic superethnos. Ideology, religion, Catholicism versus Orthodoxy, alphabet, Latin script versus Cyrillic. All of these are artificial cultural constructs that made two twin brothers hate each other to death. Poles are genetically closer to Central Russians than even some peripheral Slavic peoples, like Bulgarians or Serbs, who for centuries have absorbed Balkan and Mediterranean genes. It turns out that to be enemies for 500 years, you don't have to be strangers at all. It's enough to just start praying to different patriarchs and reading books in different alphabets. But wait, if Russia is so similar to Poles, Ukrainians and Belarusians in the south and west, then who lives in the north of this vast country? Here's where things get trippy. Our genetic map takes a sharp and very unexpected turn. Forget for a moment about the steppes, the Dnieper and the Polish hussars. We move north, beyond an imaginary line that runs roughly from Tver through Vologda to the Ural Mountains. And here, a completely different story begins. Here's an unexpected fact. If you take a native Russian from the Arkhangelsk, Vologda, or Kostroma regions, his genetic makeup will reveal a surprising picture. The share of the Slavic haplogroup R1A in his ancestry drops sharply, while another rises prominently. The N1C1 haplogroup comes to the fore, a marker that is characteristic of Finno-Ugric and Uralic peoples. Genetically, this northern Russian person is much closer to an Estonian, a Karelian, or a Finn from the suburbs of Helsinki than to his compatriot from Voronezh or Krasnodar. How and why did this happen? The explanation lies in a unique historical process, which has virtually no analogues in world history. When the Eastern Slavs, the future Novgorodians and Rostovians, began their advance to the cold north and northeast, these lands were not empty. For thousands of years, Finno-Ugric tribes lived there, the mysterious Chud, Meria, Moroma, Ves, and Meschera. In Western Europe, the arrival of a new, more technologically advanced people usually ended in massacre, genocide, and the burning of villages. But on the vast expanses of the Russian plain, there was enough space for everyone. Slavic colonists who had more advanced agriculture and state organization simply settled next to the local hunters and fishermen. The cause and effect relationship is phenomenal. The Slavs did not exterminate the Finno-Ugric peoples. There was a slow, creeping, peaceful assimilation that lasted for several centuries. The Finno-Ugric tribes adopted the Slavic language because it was the language of trade, power, and cities. They adopted orthodoxy because it was the religion of the elite. They began to wear Slavic clothing and call themselves Russians. The Maria and Muroma tribes did not disappear, did not vanish into thin air, as some old textbooks say, nor did they go underground as was said about the legendary Chud. They simply put on traditional Russian shirts. They grew beards in the Byzantine fashion, started going to Orthodox churches, and became Russians. They assimilated linguistically and culturally, but their genes didn't go anywhere. They became the foundation of the northern Great Russian people. An amazing historical anecdote that will make you smile. We love to talk about our truly Russian roots, sing folk songs, but at the same time we don't even notice that we live surrounded by Finno-Ugric names. The very word Moscow, according to one of the most convincing linguistic theories, has Finno-Ugric origins. Mos means brain, bear, or dark. Var means water or river. The names of the rivers Akka, Kama, Neva, Vologda, and Seliga come from the ancient languages of the people who lived here long before the Slavs arrived. A bit of sarcasm. A Russian nationalist from Kostroma, beating his chest and shouting about Slavic brotherhood, is, according to genetic tests, 50% likely to be a direct descendant of an ancient Uralic hunter who didn't understand a word of Slavic. And there's nothing wrong with that. This makes the Russian nation incredibly complex, rich, and unique. We have combined the fiery Slavic blood of the south with the calm Nordic Uralic endurance of the north. Let's sum up the results of our genetic and historical investigation, because the picture we've gotten is truly grand. Russians are not some monolithic, test tube created ethnicity, and certainly not a mythical mix with Tatars or Mongols. In the south and centre, Russians are part of the single East Slavic family, inseparable from Ukrainians and Belarusians. A genetic monolith that ignores all customs posts and state borders. In the west, our roots are incredibly closely intertwined, to the point of complete merging, with our historical antagonists, the Poles, proving that the most brutal wars we fought were not with outsiders, but with our own biological relatives. And in the north and northeast, the Russian people carefully absorbed, preserved, and assimilated the ancient Finno-Ugric substratum, becoming a bridge between the Slavic world and the civilizations of the Urals and the Baltics. An unexpected conclusion, one that almost suggests itself and is so necessary for us today. Genes decide almost nothing when it comes to a nation. A nation is not a blood test in a test tube. It's the language we think in, the lullabies our mothers sang to us. It's the books we read and the shared historical destiny we experience together. Genetics is just a map of our ancestors' ancient migrations, not a political manifesto. The modern parallels are obvious. We keep looking for differences where science sees amazing unity, and we keep fighting over ideas, forgetting that we are made of the same atoms and the same chromosomes. And now it's time to reveal that very curious fact, the very hook I dangled at the beginning of the video. Remember, I promised to name a non-Slavic group genetically very close to Central Russia's inhabitants? Well, it's the Balts, specifically Latvians and Lithuanians. Yes, you heard that right. Although the Baltic and Slavic language groups have a common ancient ancestor, they are very different. Genetic studies have shown that modern Latvians and Lithuanians have an enormous genetic similarity with Russians from the central regions, Tver, Pskov, Novgorod, and Smolensk. Why? Because before the massive expansion of the Slavs, the vast territories of Eastern Europe were inhabited by the so-called Dnieper Balts. When the Slavs arrived, they assimilated the Balts as subtly as they later assimilated the Finno-Ugric peoples. So in the blood of the average Muscovite or Smolensk resident, there is a strong Baltic component. The Baltic stream makes us the closest relatives of those very neighbours with whom we have such complicated political relations today. And now, a question for you, my viewers, that I want to leave here for heated debate. If science today absolutely irrefutably proves that we, Poles, Ukrainians, Belarusians, and even Lithuanians and Finns, are practically branches of one giant genetic tree, doesn't this mean that our entire 1,000-year history of conflicts was one big, tragic, and senseless mistake? What is more important in determining who is one of us and who is a stranger? The objective structure of your DNA or the subjective idea in your head? Write your opinion in the comments. I would be incredibly interested to read what you think about this. Leave a like if this shattered a couple of your historical stereotypes. Subscribe and see you again in the labyrinths of our history. Subtitles.